SABC News reporter Hasina Gori has been covering that interview for us. A very good afternoon, Hasina. Is this just a tick box exercise, this interview process? I mean, she's the only nominee.
Good afternoon, and yes, that's quite an important question that you bring up, and one that I do want to explore more when we speak to my guest in a little bit. But just for a brief look at what we've seen this morning is we've seen Justice Mandisa Maya, the president of the SCA, once again here in front of the Judicial Service Commission, this time for that spot of Deputy Chief Justice. The last time that we were here, she was being interviewed for that Chief Justice position, and she was also nominated by the JSC. That was the name that they put forward to the president as their firm favorite. However, today, she's once again here, this time with the president's nomination for this position as second in charge of the Chief Justice, as well as the entire judiciary as a whole, which is one of the roles that this position does hold. But to get some kind of understanding on whether or not this interview process was firstly needed and whether it's just a tick box, and what are the processes from here. I want to bring in Judges Martin Bekazeli Benjamin, who speaks quite a lot on this issue and is quite well versed on it. Let's start with what is the role of the Deputy Chief Justice? We know what Chief Justice does, but what does the Deputy Chief Justice do?
So the Constitution doesn't define the role of Chief Justice. The definition we actually find in Section 4.2 of the Superior Courts Act, which says that the Deputy Chief Justice is supposed to support the Chief Justice in their responsibility, and if for any reason the Chief Justice is unavailable or there's a vacancy, the Deputy steps in. Practically speaking, though, we've seen that the Deputy Chief Justice has taken over certain of the responsibilities. The biggest one is handling and chairing the Judicial Conduct Committee, which is responsible for holding judges accountable in the case of misconduct. And there are other responsibilities, including heading up the South African Judicial Education Institute, and those responsibilities really come with not only being the deputy to the head of the judiciary, but also being a member of the Constitutional Court.
We've seen her being interviewed. Justice Mandisa Maya was interviewed, earlier this year quite rigorously on her experience, on her, rulings that she's given, etc. Was it necessary for her to be re-interviewed by the Commission this morning for this second in charge position?
So the Constitution requires that the President consults the JSC each time he makes an appointment to either the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, or the head and deputy of the Supreme Court of Appeal. So it is a constitutionally required process of interview. But also, I think, practically speaking, there is a lot of value in having Justice Maya come back and speak specifically to the role of Deputy Chief Justice, because as we heard today, there are some differences in the position from where she is now to the Deputy Chief Justice. One of the questions that she faced was on how she'll handle the transition from being the head of an institution to being the deputy. How will she provide leadership to the people who account to her, but also how will she account to the Chief Justice? So that's an important aspect that we would not have gotten in the February interview.
Another question that was put to her was around another issue that I want to understand more is, we know she was nominated by the president this time around. Her name was put forward. She subsequently accepted that nomination. Now we hear the interviews. Is this the same process that it is at the president's prerogative to appoint to this position, or does the JSC have a final say in her appointment here?
So we go back to the Constitution, and Section 174 of the Constitution is clear. The President must consult the JSC. So the JSC must express an opinion on the suitability of the candidate. They may decide, yes, she is suitable for appointment, or they might say no, and they must give the reasons why they say no. Ultimately, it's the President who takes the final decision, but he must do so after having seriously considered what the JSC has put forward. You might find we're not in that situation now, but we might find in future where the JSC said that this candidate is not appointable for X number of reasons, issues relating to integrity, to competence and the like, and the president would have to give a concrete reason why they will go ahead with the appointment despite the misgivings of the JSC. So it is an important process.
We've heard those interviews, through the morning. Quite a lot of questions around gender transformation, also language transformation really came up, which you didn't see in the last interviews, but also questions around how would she, work within a leadership position where there's someone else, leading. How do you think Justice Maya has fared in those interviews today?
Well, I think overall this was a much tougher interview than she faced in February. There were some pointed questions on a number of issues. I think the biggest one was on the administration at the Supreme Court of Appeal, where there have been lapses, for example, in the registry office. And she had to concede that she's embarrassed to admit to some of those things because they fell under her watch. So I think it was overall a tougher interview, but she did well. She was frank on some issues. I wish she had given a little bit more detail, for example, on the issue of how will she manage the transition of being the head of an institution to being the deputy, which is actually an important one because she would need to work quite closely with Justice Zondo in executing their vision for the judiciary and in ensuring that the plans that they have are actually implemented. So I think overall she did well. I could have done with a little bit more detail.
Thank you so much. That was Judges Mata and Bekezele Benjamin speaking to us here just as those interviews with the SCA President Mandisa Maya concluded this morning. She's being interviewed for that position of a Deputy Chief Justice. We'll keep you updated with deliberations, which is going to happen in the next hour. That's it for me for now. Back to you in studio.
Thanks very much, Hasina.